Hi Mark, I'm Bella Chen Qianyu. My student number is S0441017. I'm a sophomore at NCUE. Theaster Gate, How to Revive a Neighborhood with Imagination, Beauty and Art. I'm a potter, which means like a fairly humble vocation. I know a lot about pots. I've spent about 15 years making them. One of the things that really excites me in my artistic practice and being trained as a potter is that you very quickly learn how to make great things out of nothing. That I spend a lot of time at my wells with mounds of clay trying stuff, and that the limitations of my capacity, my ability, was based on my hands and my imagination. That if I wanted to make a really nice bowl and I didn't know how to make a foot yet, I would have to learn how to make a foot. That process of learning has been very, very helpful to my life. I feel like, as a potter, you also start to learn how to shape the world. There have been times in my artistic capacity that I wanted to reflect on other really important moments in the history of the U.S., the history of the world where tough things happened. But how do you talk about tough ideas without separating people from that content? Could I use art like this old, discontinued fire horse from Alabama to talk about the complexity of a moment of civil rights in the 60s? Is it possible to talk about my father and I doing labor projects? My dad was a roofer, construction guy who owned small business, and at 80, he was really ready to retire, and his tar kettle was my inheritance. Now, a tar kettle doesn't sound like much of an inheritance. It wasn't. It was stinky and it took up a lot of space in my studio. But I asked my dad if he would be willing to make some art with me. If we could reimagine these kind of nothing materials as something very special. And by elevating the materials and my dad's skills, could we start to think about tar just like clay in a new way, shaping it differently, helping us to imagine what was possible? After clay, I was then kind of turned on to lots of different kinds of materials, and my studio grew a lot because I thought, well, it's not really about the material, it is about our capacity to shape things. I became more and more interested in ideas and more things that were happening just outside my studio. Just to give you a little bit of context, I live in Chicago. I live on the south side now. I'm a west sider. For those of you who are not Chicagoans, that won't mean anything. But if I didn't mention that I was a west sider, there would be a lot of people in the city that would be very upset. The neighborhood that I live in is Grand Crossing. It is a neighborhood that has been better days. It is not a gated community by far. There's a lot of abandonment in my neighborhood. And while I was kind of busy making pots and busy making arts and having a good art career, there was all of this stuff that was happening just outside my studio. All of us know about falling houses, walkers, and the challenges of blight. And I feel like we talk about it with some of our cities more than others, but I think a lot of our U.S. cities and beyond have the challenge of blight, abandoned buildings that people no longer know what to do anything with. And so I thought, is there a way that I could start to think about these buildings as an extension or an expansion of my artistic practice? And that if I was thinking along with other creatives, architects, engineers, real estate finance people, that us together might be able to kind of think in more complicated ways about the reshaping of cities. And so I bought a building. The building was really affordable. We tricked it out. We made it as beautiful as we could to try to just get some activity happening on my blog. Once I bought the building for about $18,000, I didn't have any money left, so I started sweeping the buildings as a kind of performance. This performance art, and people would come over and I would start sweeping. Because the broom was free and sweeping was free, it worked out laughter. But we would use the building land to stage exhibitions, small dinners, and we found that building on my blog, Theaster, we now refer to blog as Theaster projects. That in a way that buildings became a kind of gathering site for lots of different kinds of activity. We turned the building into what we called now the archive house. The archive house would do a lot of these amazing things. Very significant people in the city and beyond would find themselves in the middle of the hood. And that's when I felt like maybe there's a relationship between my history with clay and these new things that were starting to develop, that we were slowly starting to reshape how people imagine the south side of the city. One house turned into a few houses, and we always try to suggest that not only is creating a beautiful vessel important, but the content of what happens in those buildings is also very important. So we were not only thinking about development, but we were thinking about the program, thinking about the kind of connection that could happen between one house and another, between one neighbor and another. This building became what we call the listening house, and it has a collection of discarded books from the Johnson Publishing Corporation and other books from an old bookstore that was going out of business. I was actually just wanting to activate these buildings as much as I could with whatever and whoever who joined me. In Chicago, there's amazing building stock. This building, which had been the former track house on the block, and then the building became abandoned. It became a great opportunity to really imagine what else could happen there. So this space we converted into what we call Black Cinema House. Black Cinema House was an opportunity in the hood to screen films that were important and relevant to the flock who lived around me. That if we wanted to show an old Melvin Van Peebles film, we could. If we wanted to show Car Wash, we could. That would be awesome. The building we soon outgrew. We had to move to a larger place. Black Cinema House, which was made from just a small piece of clay, had to grow into a much larger piece of clay, which is now my studio. What I realized was that for those of you who are zoning junkies, like some of the things that I was doing in these buildings that had been left behind, we were not the use by which the buildings were built, and that there are cities policies that say, hey, a house that is residential needs to stay residential, but what do you do in neighborhoods when are not anybody interested in living there? That the people who have the means to live have already left? What do we do with the abandoned buildings? And so I was trying to wake them out using culture. We found that was so exciting for work, and people were so responsive to the work that we had to then find bigger buildings. By the time we found bigger buildings, there was, in part, the resources necessary to think about those things. In the bank that we call the Arts Bank, it was in pretty bad shape. There was about 6 feet of standing water. It was a difficult project to finance because banks are not interested in neighborhood because people are not interested in neighborhood because nothing had happened there. It was dirt. It was nothing. It was nowhere. And so we just started imagining what else could happen in this building. Applause. And so now that the rumor of my blog has spread and lots of people are starting to visit, we have found that the bank can now be a center for exhibition, archives, music performance, and that there are people who are now interested in being adjacent to those buildings because we brought some heat and that we kind of made a fire. One of the archives that we will have there is this Johnson Publishing Corporation. We have also started to collect memorabilia from American history from people who live or have lived in that neighborhood. Some of these images are degraded images of black people, kind of histories of very challenging content, and we're better than a neighborhood with young people who are constantly asking themselves about their identity to talk about some of the complexities of race and class. In some ways, the bank represents a hub that we are trying to create a pretty hardcore knot of cultural activity, and that if we could start to make multiple hugs and connect some cool green stuff around there, that the buildings that we have purchased and rehabbed, which is now around 60 and 70 units, that if we could land miniatures Versailles on top of that and connect these buildings by a beautiful green belt. Applause. That this place where people never wanted to be would become an important destination for folk from all over the country and world. In some ways, it feels very much like Adam Potter, that we tackle the things that are at our wills. We try with the skills that we have to think about this next bowl that I wanted to make. And it went from a bowl to a singular house to a block to a neighborhood to a cultural district to thinking about the city. And at every point, there were things that I didn't know that I had to learn. I've never learned so much about zoning law in my life. I never thought I would have to. But as a result of that, I'm finding that there's not just room for my own artistic practice. There's room for a lot of other artistic practice. So people started asking us, well, Theaster, how are you going to go to scale? And what's your sustainability plan? Laughter, applause. And what I found was that I couldn't explore myself. That was seen necessary in cities like Akron, Ohio, and Detroit, Michigan, and Gary, Indiana. Is that there are people in those places who already believe in those places, that are already dying to make those places beautiful, and then often those people who are passionate about a place are disconnected from the resources necessary to make cool things happen, or disconnect from a contingent of people that could help make things happen. So now we are starting to give advice around the country on how to start with what you got, how to start with the things that are not in front of you, how to make something out of nothing, how to reshape your world at a well or at your block or at the scale of the city. Thank you. Thank you so much. Applause. June Cohen. Thank you. So I think many people watch this will be asking themselves the question you just raised at the end. How can they do this in their own city? You can explore yourself. Give us a few pages out of your playbook about what someone who is inspired about the city can do to take on projects like yours. Theaster Gates. One of the things I have found that really important is giving thought to not just the kind of individual project like an old house, but what's the relationship between an old house, a local school, a small bargate, and is there some kind of synergy between those things? Can you get those folk talking? I have found that in cases where neighborhoods have failed, they still often have a pulse. How do you identify the pulse in that place, the passionate people, and then how do you get folk who have been fighting, slogging for 20 years, re-energized about the place that they live? And so someone has to do that work. If I were a traditional developer, I would be talking about the buildings alone and then put a for lease sign in the window. I think that you actually have to create more than that. That is, there is a way in which you have to be mindful about what are the business that I wanted to grow there, and then are there people who live in this place who want to grow those business with me? Because I think it is not just a culture space or housing. There has to be the creation of an economic score. So thinking about these things together feels right. John Cohen's. It's hard to get people to create this spark again when people have been slogging for 20 years. Are there any more methods you have found that have helped break through? Theaster Gates. Yeah, I think that now there are a lot of examples of folk who are doing amazing work, but those methods are sometimes like when the media is constantly saying that only violent things happen in a place, then based on your skill set and the particular content, what are the things that you can do in your neighborhood to kind of fight some of that? So I have found that if you are a theater person, you have outdoor street theater festival. In some cases, we don't have the resources in certain neighborhoods to do things that are in certain kind of splash. But if we can then find ways of making sure that people who are local to a place, plus people who could be supportive of the things that are happening locally, when those people get together, I think really amazing things can happen. June Cohen. So interesting. And how can you make sure that the projects you have creating are actually for the disadvantaged and not just for the sort of vegetarian in diet movie crowd that might move in to take advantage of them? Theaster Gates. Right on. So I think that is where it starts to get into the thick weeds. June Cohen's. Let's go there. Theaster Gates. Right now. Grading across is 99% black, or at least living, and we know that maybe who owns property in a place is different from who walks the street every day. It is reasonable to say that Grand Crossing is already in the process of being something different than it is today. But are there ways to think about housing trust or land trust or a mission-based development that starts to project some of the space that happens? Because when you have 7,500 empty lots in a city, you want something to happen there, but you need entities that are not just interested in the development piece, but entities that are interested in stabilization piece. And I feel like often the developer piece is really motivated, but the other work of a kind of neighborhood consciousness, that part doesn't live anymore. So how do you start to grow up important watchdogs that ensure that the resources that are made available to new flocks that are coming in are also distributed to folk who have lived in a place for a long time? June Collins. That makes so much sense. One more question. You make such compelling case for beauty and the importance of beauty and the art. There would be others who will argue that funds will be better spent on basic service for the disadvantaged. How do you combat that viewpoint or come against it? Theaster Gate. I believe that beauty is a basic service, a plus. Often what I have found is that when there are resources that have not been made available to certain under-resourced cities or neighborhoods or communities, that sometimes culture is the thing that helps to ignite, and that I can't do anything, but I think that there's a way in which if you can start with culture and get people kind of reinvented in their place, other kinds of adjacent amenities start to grow, and then people can make a demand that a poetic demand and the political demands that are necessary to wake up our cities. They also become very poetic. June Collins. It makes perfect sense to me. Theaster. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you. Theaster Gates. Applause. It's all about my recording. Thank you.